These events, but particularly the Russian Revolution, that leads Yeats to come up with the tableau of apocalyptic images that makes up the poem. We should note, however, that these images are complicated by what appears to be a whole raft of Christian allusions, references, and images. Ireland, as we know, was, still largely is, intensely Christian, with its predominantly Catholic and Protestant populations. Yeats was raised as a Protestant. Christian imagery features in many of his poems, and he did live a very self-consciously spiritual life. But as Ronan made clear, Yeats was never in any sense an orthodox Christian. He was always more open to paganism, occultism, and various kinds of alternative supernatural belief systems than he was to any Christian teachings. What this means in terms of the Second Coming is that the Christian allusions are used in contrary kinds of ways, beginning with the title. The poem as a whole brings together two quotations from the Bible. In the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 24, Christ predicts his second coming. And in the book of Revelation, there's a vision of the coming of the beast of the apocalypse, otherwise known as the Antichrist. Yeats suggests that these two predictions are both the same, which obviously goes against orthodox Christian belief. There's nothing redemptive or reassuring about this second coming. There are plenty of allusions throughout Yeats's poetry to either the arrival of a new god or to some kind of revolutionary change in the world's nature. The Second Coming is not only the most explicit of these poems, it's also arguably the most pessimistic. The title, in fact, is a bit misleading. Yeats didn't see Christ's birth in Bethlehem as the first coming because, as I've suggested, he didn't believe that Christ was the Messiah. Second birth would be a more accurate title. The second birth of the Egyptian Sphinx, as we'll see, but transposed to a completely different context where revolutionary and counter-revolutionary violence hold sway. So let's turn now to the poem. The first line confronts directly Yeats' fixation on something else we've heard about, cycles of history, turning and turning in the widening gyre. Yeats' occult system had a sphere as its central symbol, with a pair of cones inside. The cones are known as gyres, and they represent the world of appearance, the world as we see and experience it. The coming of the new age is signalled by one gyre's expanding and the other's contracting. Yeats is invoking this image because in this period he believed that the current historical period, the Christian era, was coming to an end, having lasted for exactly 2,000 years, the length of an age. What was the new period that would replace it? It would be completely unlike the Christian one that was already fading. Incidentally, don't be too concerned about the detail here. It's quite esoteric. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. We could read this as saying that man, or civilization, is losing touch with Christ. Western culture is drifting away from its Christian heritage. Or we could read it that man is the falconer, losing touch with nature. The falcon, having mastered nature, humankind is no longer properly attuned to it. So I guess this would be partly a response to this notion of nature as otherness, as alterity for Yeats. Things fall apart. The centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. As a result of this loss of tradition or heritage, the wisdom of the ages, everything is breaking down. Mere anarchy, meaning not minor or insignificant, but something like absolute anarchy being loosed upon the world. Then come a couple of startling liquid images. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, bloodshed on a vast, almost tidal scale, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. There's a return here to Christian imagery, specifically to the purifying rite of baptism, although now the baptismal waters have been washed away or drowned by the tidal wave of blood and chaos. This is one of the most quoted couplets in Yeats' entire oeuvre. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. If the best are our leaders, those who rule over us, then they've fallen, they've lost touch with their principles. because conviction must be performed, which is to say it must be ceremonious, involved with ritual. The loss of tradition and heritage also means that rituals no longer have the same magisterial power. They're divested of that all-important conviction. Now, on the other hand, we could see the worst, the fanatics and extremists. Yeats always critical of these kinds of people. We could see them as implicated in the violent upheavals of the 20th century through their passionate intensity. Moving on to the second stanza, the poem takes an ominous turn. It begins with a new tone in which the speaker makes what seems to be an appeal. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. In these lines and in this stanza, there's a sense of helplessness, as if what is going to happen can't be averted in any way. And again, the word revelation has both secular and Christian meanings, as something that is communicated or brought to light on one hand, or as God's disclosure of himself and his will to his creatures on the other hand. Yeats is really pushing language throughout this poem, making it work extra hard to convey some quite profound ambiguities. The second coming, hardly are these words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Spiritus Mundi is a Latin term, literally the world spirit, the spirit of the universe that Yeats conceived of as a general storehouse of images. The spirit operates as kind of collective memory or unconscious, whereby the human race can preserve its past memories. And the memory image that Yeats has in mind here is an ancient, enigmatic one. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with a lion body, and the head of a man, a gaze as blank and pitiless as the sun. It is, of course, an Egyptian sphinx that Yeats is summoning up here, a monument that is as inscrutable as it is visually overwhelming. In other words, he's looking here for a specifically pre-Christian image that is unquestionably threatening, even if we can't quite say why. In any case, Yeats soon tells us why. The Sphinx is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. There are vultures flying overhead, indignant because they don't have anything to feed on, only this giant stone monument, which is slowly coming to life. The shadows here add a nice touch. They make the desert birds seem like heralds or omens of chaos and unrest, as if they themselves are carriers of darkness. And more explicitly, the darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. For 2,000 years, the entirety of the Christian era, this unholy creature has been lying dormant. Now it's about to come to life, and we can assume wreak havoc on the world. Yeats concludes with one of the most haunting and scarifying images in modern poetry. And what rough beast, its outcome at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. The rocking cradle of Christianity has at last made way for its opposite, as Christianity has reached its utmost limit. The new God will be born in Bethlehem, the birthplace of Christ, but it won't be passive infancy, maternal love that defines this second birth. The God of the next era, rising from the desert sands, is a destroyer, not a protector, a rough beast rather than a lamb. So it's not an animal or a bird, but a monster that is being alluded to here. Something demonic rather than divine. What is this New World Order, and who is this bestial god of war? Yeats liked to claim later in his life that the poem predicted the rise of fascism, that was a kind of prophecy of what would get underway in Italy and Germany 10 years later. Some critics have gone with this idea and suggested other dictatorial figures. Stalin in the USSR, Franco in Spain, Mao Zedong in China. I think this is a little bit fanciful. the poem's relentless ambiguities, its unforgiving language, and stark, arresting imagery make it applicable to any period of historical turmoil and upheaval, which could be why it's so widely read today. Leader in the Swan, our third poem, is also one of Yeats's most celebrated. It's based on a Greek myth, and that in itself suggests a certain amount of ambition. The myth has undergone countless retellings over the centuries and has inspired a lot of paintings. Artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Correggio, Rubens have had a go at it, and so has Michelangelo. We know that this painting, a copy of Michelangelo's which has been lost, was viewed by Yeats in Venice, and that he took inspiration from it. Further, while he was composing the poem, he had a reproduction of this image over his desk, Michelangelo's original sketch for the painting. So Yeats was certainly aiming high when he decided to tackle the myth, and most critics would say he succeeded. Technically, the poem is a sonnet, 14 lines following a fairly strict rhyming scheme. More specifically, it's a kind of hybrid. The first 8 lines are known as the octave. It's composed of 2 Shakespearean quatrains or 4-line stanzas. And the last 6 lines, sestet, is a Petrarchan sestet made up of 2 tercets, 3 lines each. It's probably about as much, if not more, technical detail than you need. So I'll move on to the interpretation by posing an obvious question. Why was Yeats so interested in this myth? And how did his usage of it differ from anyone else's? For a start, Yeats is interested in swans. They feature in at least 5 other